My name is Monica Caldwell. I spent 20 years in the United States Air Force, with most of my time overseas. A few months ago, I took off the uniform for the last time and stepped into a civilian world that had kept moving without me. I hadn't planned on coming back to Virginia, but the invitation arrived in the mail like a dare I couldn't ignore. Vanessa was getting married. My cousin, my childhood partner in crime, the one who used to beg me to sneak cookies before dinner and swear we'd never let anything come between us. We hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years, not since the day I left for my third deployment, and she didn't even say goodbye. The venue was a sprawling estate outside Charlottesville, all manicured lawns and marble fountains. It looked like something out of a bridal magazine, the kind with people who never sweat or slouch. I parked my rental near the valet circle, stepped out in my best navy dress, and walked through the front doors like I belonged there. I barely made it past the coat check before the first sideways glance hit me. There's a particular look people give when they recognize you but aren't sure they want to. It's quick, polite, then gone. I caught that look 3 times before I even made it to the reception hall. The hostess asked my name twice, scrolled too long through her iPad, then finally nodded and pointed me toward table 15. It was tucked in the far back, past the buffet line, and dangerously close to the kitchen doors. Every time they swung open, a gust of fryer grease and dish soap hit me like I was on KP duty again. I sat down alone. The seat across from me was empty, the 2 beside me filled with older relatives I barely recognized and who clearly didn't recognize me. One of them asked if I was here helping with the catering. I smiled and said nothing. It wasn't worth correcting. Vanessa hadn't arrived yet, but the buzz in the room was thick with her name. People laughed too loudly, clinked their glasses, and repeated phrases like driven, visionary, and one of our own. I sipped water from a sweating glass and watched a slideshow flicker across a giant screen. There she was in a white suit, shaking hands with a senator. There she was on a TEDx stage, talking about leadership and legacy. Nobody looked my way. Nobody mentioned the years I spent overseas, or the time I briefed NATO, or the countless nights I slept beside a radio, waiting for the next emergency call. My own aunt walked by without even pausing, caught up in conversation about centerpieces. I told myself I shouldn't take it personally. They didn't know what I had done, but deep down, I think some part of me believed that showing up in person would be enough, that I'd walk in and someone would say, "We missed you." But no one did. They barely even noticed. And as the DJ tested the sound system and someone yelled to turn the lights down, I sat perfectly still. My back is straight. My smile is quiet. My hands were resting on a folded napkin I didn't need. I had been in combat zones, in command rooms, in situations where a wrong breath could cost lives. But nothing quite prepared me for the chill of being invisible in your own family. The ballroom glowed like a page out of a luxury wedding catalog. Crystal chandeliers hung from a vaulted ceiling painted in gold leaf. Every table was dressed in white linen and blooming with orchids that probably cost more than my monthly pension. The room was already full when the music changed. A string quartet swelled into a classic arrangement as Vanessa entered, radiant in a custom gown, arm in arm with a man who looked exactly like the kind of fiancé you'd expect from a family who measured worth by wedding venues and alumni lists. Cameras flashed. The crowd stood. I stayed seated. I watched it all from the edge, just past the last row of tables, close enough to hear but far enough to be missed. Every speech sang the same tune. Vanessa's drive, her achievements, her commitment to civic impact. The mayor talked about her nonprofit work as if she'd built it on her own. No one mentioned that she started it while still in college, with tuition covered by a military family scholarship, a scholarship that came from my unit. From me. I had submitted her name quietly, back when she told me she wanted to make something of herself. I never asked her to thank me. I just thought one day, maybe she would. But now she stood on a stage surrounded by applause, and I wasn't even in the footnotes. The waiter passed by with champagne, then paused and looked down at me. His eyes flickered to my black dress, then to the name tag pinned to my clutch. He gave a nod, too polite to ask, then whispered, "Kitchen staff uses the back hall." I looked at him, said nothing, and turned my gaze back to the couple on stage. My sister Danielle slid into the seat next to mine without a word, lips pursed in judgment like she was bracing herself for my reaction. She leaned in close, her voice low and tight. Just stay quiet. Don't make this about you. This is Vanessa's night. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I watched Vanessa beam as her boss handed her a plaque for community leadership. I watched our grandmother wipe away tears during a montage of Vanessa's childhood photos, all carefully curated, every image full of light and laughter. None of them showed the two of us in uniform Halloween costumes, or the time she sent me a letter at boot camp with a stick figure drawing of us flying jets. I remembered those. I guess she didn't. The crowd roared when the best man toasted the bride, called her a self-made woman, and said no one had given her anything. The words caught in my throat like smoke. I reached for my water glass, trying to ground myself in something that didn't spin. My name hadn't been mentioned once, not even as a guest. I noticed the videographer pan right past me during the family table shots. I wasn't even on the call sheet. I was a shadow in my own bloodline, and the more they celebrated her, the more I felt like a mistake that needed erasing. Someone behind me whispered something about my shoes, saying I didn't look like family. I smiled. That smile that says, I've been through worse, because I have. But there's a difference between enemy fire and friendly silence. When dinner came, they brought me the vegetarian plate I hadn't requested. I ate without complaint. I'd had worse meals in colder places, but with every fork scrape and every fake laugh echoing across Crystal, I could feel the distance growing, not just between me and Vanessa, but between me and who I used to be in this family. At one point, the bride passed by my table. Our eyes met for less than a second. She smiled that polished smile she probably practiced in the mirror, the kind that lands well in magazines. Then she looked past me like I was just another seat filler. And maybe to her I was. I didn't stand up. I didn't call her name. I just sat there, letting the music, the speeches, the bright, perfect future she was selling wash over me. The whole thing felt like a play. Every character knew their lines. Every light was staged just right, except I wasn't in the script. I was halfway through pushing peas around my plate when the room fell quiet. Not in a dramatic music stops kind of way. Just that subtle hush when something shifts, and no one knows why yet. I looked up and saw him walking toward me, dressed in a crisp dress uniform, medals aligned, back straight like he still woke to reveille. I didn't recognize him at first, but his eyes locked onto mine like we were in a different place, a different time. And when he reached my table, he didn't shake my hand or offer a polite smile. He stood at attention, heels together, and saluted. "Commander Caldwell," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Then he added, "You saved my brother's life." For a moment, no one breathed. I felt every head turn. Forks froze midair. Someone's phone lit up on a table and stayed glowing in their lap. The man dropped his salute and stepped back just enough to give me space. Not like he was retreating, like he was making room for what came next. My brain scrambled to place him. His face was older now, fuller around the jaw, but the name clicked before the memory. Private Mason, the younger brother of Lieutenant James Mason, the same James who had been pinned down in a failed extraction op near Jalalabad, the same James one carried to the evac chopper with shrapnel in my arm and blood soaking my vest. I hadn't thought about that day in years. The paperwork, the silence that followed. James never made it home, but his brother did. And now he was standing here, in the middle of a wedding reception, breaking the script like it was nothing. He turned to the crowd and said something about honor, about sacrifice. I barely heard the words. All I could hear was the static in my chest, settling into something steadier. He looked at the groom and added that, if not for Commander Caldwell, he wouldn't be here tonight, that his family owed me more than they could ever say. The groom blinked, eyes darting between us like he'd missed a step in the dance. And then, finally, Vanessa moved. She turned slowly, wine glass still in hand, frozen mid-sip. Her face shifted in shades. Recognition, disbelief. Then something tighter, something close to shame. The best man smiled, not smug but sincere. Said he hadn't planned to say anything. Just saw myself sitting alone and couldn't believe no one had introduced me. Said it felt wrong. And in that moment, I believed him. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just the weight of silence cracking wide open. Like the whole room had been holding its breath and didn't know why. I didn't say much, just nodded, stood up slowly, and shook his hand. The moment didn't last long, but it didn't need to. It had already carved itself into the room like a name finally spoken out loud. For the first time that night, people didn't look through me. They looked at me, really looked. And not as the woman who didn't belong, but as someone they suddenly weren't sure how to place. The motel room smelled faintly of detergent and leftover takeout. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes off, dress unzipped halfway, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers. I hadn't planned to stay long in town. A few polite nods, a gift card, and gone by morning. But that moment at the wedding had cracked something open I hadn't known was sealed shut. There was a knock around 10, not urgent, but steady. I opened the door and found Danielle standing there in a sweatshirt and jeans, arms folded, eyes rimmed red like she'd been rehearsing this. She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped inside and sat down like it hurt to carry what she came to say. She pulled a folded letter from her purse. Old paper, faint coffee stain near the corner. I knew it before I even touched it. The military condolence letter. The one I was told never arrived. Danielle looked up at me and said it had come right after my second deployment. The brass envelope, the seal, the words that tried to explain the kind of loss that never really makes sense. Our mother had read it, then asked Danielle to keep it hidden. She didn't want people talking, didn't want the family name tied to death, to grief, to war. They thought that if I was remembered too loudly, it would cast too long a shadow. They chose silence over recognition, pretended my service was something better, left off the dinner table. I held the letter with both hands, not angry, just numb, like touching a part of myself I wasn't sure was still real. Then Danielle told me something else. Years ago, Vanessa had found one of my handwritten letters from the field. A short note I'd sent home on ration paper, scribbled between missions, talking about fear and duty, and why we stay even when it hurts. Vanessa had used that letter, submitted it as part of her scholarship application, framed it as a family story, but never said whose hand had written it. She got the award, the funding, the platform. I was the backdrop. Danielle didn't defend it, didn't ask forgiveness, just said she thought I should know. Then she left as quietly as she came, leaving the motel, colder than before. I sat there for a long time, the letter still open in my lap. Then I remembered the package. It had arrived 2 days before the wedding. No return label, just a padded envelope with my name typed in all caps. I'd tossed it into my duffel without a second thought. Now, with everything raw and exposed, I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a small black USB drive. No note. No explanation. Just that. I plugged it into my laptop with hands that felt too old and too young at once. 1 folder. 3 files. Audio, all labeled by date. I clicked the first. Static. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Captain Eli Hart, my old CO. Calm. Measured. Talking to someone I couldn't quite place. They were discussing a decision made during a mission in Kandahar. A call that broke protocol. A diversion that saved lives but violated direct orders. The fallout had nearly gotten our whole unit pulled. I remembered the mission. I remembered the aftermath. But I didn't remember this recording. The second file played next. My own voice. Shaky. Tired. Repeating a statement I'd given command while still on pain meds in the infirmary. I had taken responsibility for the decision. Covered for Hart. said it was mine. I did it to protect the team, to keep morale intact, to preserve a chain of command that was already splintering under pressure. I thought it ended there. But now, hearing it again, I realized someone had been recording from the beginning. The third file was short, a clipped message, different voice, cold, legal. It outlined concerns over the original mission report, mentioned how the audio could be used if needed, a bargaining chip, insurance. I closed the laptop, heart pounding steady and deep. I had buried that day, thought it was over, but now it wasn't just memory, it was evidence. And someone had it. Worse, someone might be ready to use it. I stared at the USB, suddenly aware of how fragile everything felt. My name, my record, my truth. All of it wrapped around a choice made in the dirt, half a world away. A choice I never regretted, but one I now realized someone else never forgot. The auditorium lights dimmed just enough to hush the murmur of the crowd. I stood backstage, smoothing the front of my black jacket. Nothing fancy, nothing that drew attention, no ribbons, no medals, just the truth I had carried for too long. When my name was called, I walked out steady, heels quiet against the wood floor, breath slow but sure. I didn't need a title. I didn't need a script. The podium felt cold under my hands. But the room felt warmer than any place I'd been in a long time. I looked out and saw rows of faces, old soldiers, young cadets, families holding frame photos. I started with the only thing that mattered. I said war doesn't give you clarity. It gives you moments. And what you do with them defines who you are long after the fighting ends. I said that sometimes doing the right thing means walking straight into the fire and carrying the blame just to keep someone else from burning. Then I clicked the button, and the screen behind me lit up with a single audio waveform. The room was silent as Captain Hart's voice played, calm, steady, giving that fatal order. Then, my own voice, younger, strained, taking the fall. And finally, the clipped legal tone, the hint of leverage, the shadow of truth twisted into silence. I let the silence after that stretch just long enough. Then I looked out at them and said, I didn't come here to call out names. I didn't come here for vindication. I came here because truth is not a luxury. It's a duty. I said you can't build a legacy on someone else's silence. A beat passed. Then one person stood. Then another. Then the entire room rose to its feet. Not clapping for a title or a rank. Clapping because someone had finally said what needed to be said. And in the back of the hall, just beyond the last row of flags, I saw her, Vanessa. No camera crew, no smile for the press. Just her, standing still, eyes locked on mine. And this time she didn't look away. 3 months later, I walked through the front doors of a modest brick building on the edge of town. The sign above read Caldwell Center for Women Veterans, named not for me, but for the woman who didn't make it back. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. My parents were there, standing near the back, and this time, when I entered, they stood too. No words, just quiet respect. Vanessa stepped forward, holding something in her hands, a glass frame. Inside was the letter I'd once written from a makeshift camp, the one she had borrowed. Now it hung in the main hall, titled simply, From Commander Monica Caldwell. This time, no one turned away. No one pretended I wasn't part of the story. There were no speeches, no apologies, just a look, honest, unflinching, and that was enough.